I'm Dane Rose, and I find myself in a bit of a cleft with high walls on either side. In that cleft, the limitation is twofold. One is exhaustion, fatigue, fear, grief, anxiety that shrinks my energy down, or my energy is shrunk down in these states to about 5% of its potential size. Now, this leads me to a lot of rest, a lot of meditation, and reflection with a chance to observe, because I guess the benefit of having an energy that is so small is the emphasis on sustainability. Meaning, if you've got $1 billion and you have a company that's losing $1 million a day, it may take you a while to run out of money, which means that you have the luxury of living as if you are making money when you are in fact losing $1 million a day. You have that luxury for around 3 years. But when you only have $3 and everything you do either adds or takes away from that pile, it's very educational on what to do to grow energy and what to shrink it. And so this is a big learning time for me in that area. And in that larger context, it's a time where my mind is much bigger than energy reserves, money, and energy and courage. These are powerful and potent energies, particularly courage. And because hurt, because loneliness, because grief and disappointment so tightly correlate to that little energy, meaning there's so much grief, there's so much hurt, there's so much disappointment. And I don't think it's disappointment, it's hurt and grief and loneliness and anger. It's not so much disappointment, but these energies, there's so much of them that to find the courage to take risks that may lead to more of those energies is literally heartbreaking. And so, courage is in short supply. There's money, there's tons of money around. And I can bring in as much as $50,000 in net revenue a month. So there's it's a limitation because of courage, meaning the amount of fear that I have, the amount of grief that I have, the amount of sadness I have, I need to be respectful of how big those feelings are and not just spend them without care, without love, without listening to the parts in me that feel those feelings, the deep, deep sadness at who parts of me have become in this culture, in this cult, the deep, deep sadness of how others have related to me. So it's about relationship, and the deep sadness about the relationship and the emphasis is that what's going on in the culture around. Since my mind is aware of numbers, and if I feel 60% pain around a certain phenomena happening, and I look around and I realize that phenomena is happening in 60-70% of people's lives around a whole country, more than 100 million people, that's painful. It's painful. So this is the path of sitting. Now, within that context of great pain, of addiction, of sadness, of grief, I am and have still made, I would call it treading water type momentum. I've made a series of videos on YouTube about suicide and with an intention of being empathic and real with mostly teenagers which was the first time in my life that I was dealing with suicide. I've made a channel on psychedelic safety and walked through the different accidents and mistakes that I've made or that I see can be made with psychedelics, to respect their incredible potential to do harm and to transform and bring in beauty. I've done a channel on taboo human emotions, where I've gone into shame, loneliness, anger, fear, resentment, hatred, self-pity, things that are unpopular to talk about in depth. So I've talked about them in depth for 1 to 3 hours a piece, and talked about myself in that again, to bring forth awareness of what's not welcome at the table, to move towards the medicine of inviting all guests to our cultural table. I've created Edible Art, which is a series of decorating nude men and women with fruits, with vegetables in an artistic form, with paints and all of this. And this is also an invitation, if you would like to be decorated and receive the gift of photos of your body created into art by me. It's a fun evening recipe where you just show up at my house, lay down on the floor in 80-degree heat, and on a sheet, and it's a ritual involving conversation, vulnerability, sharing a meal together in celebration afterwards, looking at who you want to become, who you are, and reflecting that in art. And this is a an art ritual that again has a YouTube channel, Edible Art, and art is brought into the world. You can bring some of your own favorite foods if you like, or I will supply the food. So I've created an Edible Art channel, and done 3 of those projects so far. That's fun, including my sweetheart. And then there's some mullings on contemporary shamanism, just looking at those things that are at the edge of our cultural norms, at the edge of our cultural reality, where states begin to change, where paradigms begin to shift, and looking into that. So that's been a project to create that channel. I've also added work to Co-Creating Conscious Chemistry, a book that I wrote some years ago, and again, a YouTube channel, Conscious Chemistry, to dive into some of the material that's come up around this. And one of the biggest projects going through a period of high compulsion, high overwhelm, high trauma, and absolute, terror, and the frozenness of being locked in the terror, a witnessing project to, so there's understanding trauma, understanding PTSD, in a series of some witnessing, some brainstorming, some educational, but there's more than 100 hours, it's probably around 200 hours on the Trauma and PTSD channel, where basically, like today, what that diary might look like is that it's very hard to speak. It's very hard to speak. I feel in a certain way that I'm suspended and floating. It's like there's a little ball inside my brain, surrounded by dark liquid. And I can see inside that little ball, but I can't see into the rest of my brain. And as I walk around, I also have this sense of forgetting that ball, forgetting who I am, forgetting, and not being clear and present. The fear of making mistakes and the fear of dissolving into nothingness leads my legs to clamp out of deep fear. So my calves are going through periodic clenching processes, and then it takes time in the bathtub and with some massage and with some rest to try and stretch that out just a little bit. I'm doing that right now, as just I'm reminded to it with a little bit of yoga and stretching my heels. I feel very bloated in my stomach from the overeating, which was my chosen path to manage trauma when it was too big for me, was to eat to a point where I could numb the emotion down to a point where it didn't overwhelm me. And there's a lot of grief around that. And so, so there's grief, and then there's tiredness around the fact that parts of me are so anxious about sleep, so anxious about just going into those soft, painful places of tears alone. The loneliness, the sadness of that. And wanting to be held and wanting to be massaged and not having any access to that kind of kindness and nurturing. There's no doorway to kindness. There's no mechanism for kindness. And so I can speak out, I would like kindness, I would like presence, I would like healing touch. But, in a country, in a world where I can buy just anything I want, but it's that kindness, because I don't want an official massage. I want a massage of empathy and compassion. And I've created that for myself in Thailand in great abundance, but not in the United States. I've trained a woman in Bali, and I've trained a woman in Manila, and I've trained 2 women in Thailand. I've trained 3 women in Thailand, one in Bangkok and 2 in Phuket. And so there's the space for deep kindness there. And that is also an invitation. If you feel the kindness, the empathy, the sensitivity, the love, that feminine nurturing energy, to share presence together. I would love to cook for you and to be present for you and to receive that. And I'm also skilled in energy and touch, and so there can be some reciprocation, just staying away from the highly sensual terrain out of respect for my girlfriend. And then today, so that's kind of the grief PTSD aspect, and then I'm responding to that with rest, with meditation, with changing some structures in my romantic relationship to make it more gentle, taking 3 or 4 baths, very hot baths, and then laying down on the sheepskin floor and just resting, and then dramatically increasing fish oil intake. It's just an experiment to see how much that repairs some of the lacks in my body. So 4 or 5 grams of fish oil twice a day, learning water, and making it's very, very good when I can cry, which is very difficult to access that, but it's very, very healthy and positive. Helping my crew. I've just helped my foreman hire his wife on the crew because I just love being so close to my partner, and he wanted that, and her qualifications are not her skills, but that she is his wife, and so that's makes me happy that this is her first day on the job, and then I'm also listening to a lot of audio and stuff on shamanism and stuff. So, TED Talks. I'm just discovering Castaneda as one of my last destination. With some humor and sadness about all the hoopla that all the ego hoopla and foibles that go on. And I watched a series about the success and the failure around the community of the Osho folks and corruption and stuff there, and with Castaneda and another community. There's just so much precipitation towards corruption and reaction, pain and reaction around these things, so it's still nurturing. It's nurturing to turn thoughts towards the inner world, turn thoughts towards imagination. I'm a big believer in the beauty of fantasy and fantasia, the beauty of dreaming. And so I'm less interested in is something real in terms of factually happening as I am in what's possible and suggested through the narrative, through the story, through the imagination. So I'm doing some of that, reading a book on hallucinogens and shamanism by Michael Harner, or at least edited by him. Reading Sasha Shulgin, and then coming back to myself, meditation, coming back to myself, and the grief of the gap between so many of my states of being up until the present time and who I am outside of the wound and outside of the addictive coping mechanisms I use to manage the pain. So there's this real honor. It's a real honor to meet myself, to see and be partnering with myself. And there's a real fear and fragility around that because it's so easy to lose myself into the cultural wound that envelops me and the pain management strategies that further take me away. So I lose myself into the cultural wound, and then I lose myself into the addictive patterns that manage the pain of that wound. And building this high website has also been it's kind of the last expression. The first expression was a 1,200-page book called The Uninvited Guest. That was actually preceded by a small book on shame and a small book on trauma, just to help me integrate. I need to say it and write it before parts of me get it. So it's not that any of this knowledge, quote unquote, is pristine. I would say, large chunks of it are polluted with all kinds of, just crud or waste, that has not been refined. But the bottom line is that I'm more motivated to do the work when I know I'll be sharing it with others, because it's an outer focus that is in a very healthy pain management strategy, meaning I can stuff my body with food to manage pain, or I can focus on putting something into the words to help others. And both of them take me out of the misery, the agony of feelings that I do not yet have the facility to fully hold with love and grace. And so in this process of teaching, it's a healthier distraction from the pain I can't hold that simultaneously helps me integrate and leads to change that, by the way, might help someone. And so it's an elegant dance, so there's a lot of output is part of this whole process. And today I'm working on my book called 10x Your Life. And it's one of my favorite books. It's synthesizing a lot of different things that I've learned and grown over the last 40 years. It's again helping me integrate. It's again helping me go outside myself to focus on others and their needs and wants and learnings and stuff, which I think is very healthy when one is sucked into a vortex of trauma, of inner repeating demons. And so a few days ago, I borrowed so much grief. The grief of being separate from myself for so long, in the fear induced by my father, in the fear induced by this culture, in the fear induced by so many people who, when I need them, when I long for them, when I say, please love me, please accept me, please see me, please hold me and take me in your arms, the response is a sociopathic one of dissociation rather than acceptance, belonging, response, and empathy. And this is so painful that I've dissociated from a lot of that pain. It's coming back. And the way it's coming back is by loving another like that. So my sweetheart has been in pain her whole life as well, and she has been met by the same sociopathic protocol. And to give her something that I've never received, to give her deep, deep, loyal love, to give her deep presence and acceptance for her most terrified inner child, her most traumatized inner child, and to allow her to fluidly grow up and down through her ages, from 2-year-old to older than her chronological age, and just be with her and love the 3-year-old and love the it's just so beautiful. And I think it's puzzling, a little disorienting, some anger, some envy, because I've been wanting this my entire life, for someone to be there for me in that way. And I've had less than 5% of that, meaning less than 5% of the time that I've longed for that. It's been there. And I've usually had to work really hard to find it and create it and stuff. And so to give it graciously and generously to my partner definitely leads to a certain amount of envy. What the fuck, why do you get to have this? I've been searching for this my entire fucking life, starting at 2 years old. And, now I'm just giving it to you. what I wanted my whole life and still not received. In the deep parts of me, the fear, the pain, the loneliness that I may never receive, this thing, the anger, deep pain. And yet, in giving it to her, I am receiving it, and I'm learning to give it to myself by giving it to her. And so that's by far the most stellar and stunning project, is the art of loving, the art of being loving to her, watching her body, watching the radiance descend around her and in her face, the radiance in her body, the light, and participating in that precipitation of joy and innocence, of magic, of childlike wonder and beauty. To precipitate that is my greatest honor, my greatest love, my greatest healing, and my greatest work. And so that is my deepest work, for sure. And I'm very, very pleased and grateful with how that's gone on over the last 19 months. Just huge downloads of energy, huge downloads of creativity and blessing, huge downloads of who I am in the process of loving this beautiful being. By far my greatest work. And created a dog. There's so many things that I've given to this woman that I end up having. I've wanted a dog my whole life, all kinds of just fears around that, and so I couldn't overcome those fears for myself, not being able to take care of the dog, not feeling trapped, feeling alone. And so I gave a dog to her. Now I have a dog. We have a dog. It's a really, there's so many things like that, where there's this fear of loneliness and this fear of not being able to manage things and be all alone, failing at something, has held certain things back. So I now, I created a new apartment in my favorite place of my favorite country, Nai Harn Beach in Thailand. Gave the apartment to her, and then moved in with her. So now I have an apartment, which is a level of stability that I never thought I'd have. So there's so many things, giving it to her, and then ending up receiving some of my own love reflected back. Since she is the most generous woman I know, whatever I give to her, she gives right back to me. And so that has been one of the great, and is one of the great triumphs of my life, is just the determined choice. I met this woman in an enormous amount of psychological crisis and need, and I was in enormous psychological crisis and need. and I was barely hanging on. And I just said, if I can't do it for myself, I can do it for her. And I don't know if I can do it myself, but I know I can do it for her. And it was that determination that I can do something to stop the trauma of this human being. I can do something about that. And so I will, because I can. And the magical thing was a relationship emerged. You know, it did not in any way appear to be a relationship. It appeared that this was just an opportunity to be of service. And 2 weeks later, you know, just being of service every single day. How can I help? How can I help? How can I help? I find that the part of me that I love the most is the part that is helping this woman, which means that my favorite time every day is, what can I do to help her? And listening to her blossom, listening to her open up from, you know, the trauma traps us deep into our fear, deep into our reptilian brain. It's very instinctual. It stunts all growth. It's like being a caged rat when you're in trauma. That's the psychological state. And when every noise and dins and stuff is not regulated around you and it just keeps reenacting and reenacting the trauma, it's just instinct, performance, and going through life like a caged rat, in terror and in pain. And there's only one way for that to stop, and that is to stop the re-triggering traumatic events all around, to stop the shame, to stop the abuse, and to create a safe space. Then the person needs to differentiate themselves that they've been feeling like a caged rat their whole life. But that's not who they are. That's the state induced by trauma that becomes identified with, because it's solid and stable in a destructive environment, the abused self. And the coping mechanism is the most stable element in the personality, because the abuse is constant, so the coping mechanism is constant, and both of those obscure the self. So there's an identification that happens with the abused self that has nothing to do with who that person is. So we did a lot of deep, deep work. You know, where she'd go into complete spasms, be afraid of going mad, you know, going into that pain, absolute terror, facing her hatred, the hatred of the people that would do this to a human being. The terror, the loneliness. And my job was to not leave her alone. When we went into those rooms of horror together, she was not alone. So, and I'm not a very good lover in many ways. And so I had to introduce her to guides. I introduced her to, you know, with some mixed feeling, but to the channel Lazarus, who had helped me when I was 13 years old, and dealing with some of this trauma myself. So I introduced her to Lazarus, so that when I can't love her, when I'm not good enough to be safe, that she has her own independent source. So I introduced her to a routine, and which begins with 5 to 30 minutes of inner child healing and meditation in the morning, then she's got her different guides and, you know, angels, and then she's got Lazarus, and maybe she has a little bit of healthy stuff from her Christianity that can help here and there. And I just love this woman, and when she goes into deep work through reenacted trauma and starts shaking or wanting to hurt herself, that's when I show up to protect, to say, no, you've never had a single person to stand up for you in your entire life. And you've had so many people beating you down and then shaming you and blaming you for expressing your emotions around being beaten down. And that's not you, and it's not your fault. None of that is your fault. All this corridors of emotional garbage needs to go back to your parents, back to your church, back to your peers in school, back to your culture. This is not who you are. And that's all it takes for a little girl. One person, one human being who sees her beauty, who sees her absolute love, the essence of innocent joy that she is, and that says no one's going to hurt that. You're going to protect this self. That's all it took. One person. And I had several people do that to some degree in my life. And so I'm here. And she wanted to die, as a young child, and probably wouldn't have made it without a little bit of support. But there's so much that our cult and that our environment does not want to hear that is real for the children, for the people experiencing these nightmares, from bullying to teasing to shaming, to ignoring, to blocking, to judging, to gossiping. There's just so many things that are so painful. And so having a witness that protects the innocence of the little child, and that under no circumstance allows the child to take on the abuse and the inadequacies of the adults around the child. And having someone to love deeply and fully with no restrictions around emotion or time frame. Time frame is huge. You cannot go into deep despair and horror when you know someone's going to ring a bell in 50 minutes. It's a joke. But you can go into timeless horror and find the little girl in there and love her and help her exit the torture chamber. When you have all the time in the world, when nothing matters more than protecting the vulnerability and the innocence of that child. You can go in there when you have a loving witness that sees your beauty and has no agenda but freeing your innocence from that hell. And when you have that solidness, that commitment, that clarity to spend all day and all night if necessary, to retrieve that part of the cell, retrieve that part of the self from its cell, to go into those mad areas of the brain that have gone insane, and to love them, and to love them with grief, to hold them, and to protect them. Sometimes it only takes 20 minutes, and sometimes it takes hours. But those hours create a pivot, a blossoming that can last a lifetime. Those hours are the most fruitful hours that a couple, that an individual, that a human being can spend. Because they are not human and they are not whole when large parts of them are trapped in regressed places within the psyche. I have the joy of watching an exponential growth curve, 3,600% growth in 18 months. You know, if we were a civilized culture that valued substance more than the symbol of substance in the form of money, achieving 3,600% growth, you know, there'd be Forbes 400 lists of, you know, and indexes of top performing growth funds. But instead, we're all excited about 23% return on the symbol of value, with people that, whether they have billions or not, leave parts of their psyche trapped in a prison that is created by this culture that sees many of us spending parts of ourselves there for life. Life in prison. Why would we not punish other people when we are all in prison? With little chance of getting out in the current cultural trajectory of many of our lives. And I've had the honor of taking a stand for one person's life and freeing about 20% of her together, freeing 20% of her, and knowing in the trajectory of her life, like so many of ours, including perhaps my own, that would never have happened. And I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud that I've spent $100,000 in time off work doing the most important thing a human being can do in a culture that doesn't have words for it, in a culture that will never honor it, in a culture that thinks a Lamborghini is more noteworthy than this. But I'd trade a Lamborghini for that opportunity any day. And I feel deeply proud that as ignorant as I am in this culture, I know enough to know that that is way more valuable than money, despite the fact that I've received tens of thousands of messages to the contrary, including the deep betrayal of so many that I've asked for help for myself, that have placed looking good, being comfortable, and having money over the opportunity to honor who they are by performing that kind of service for another human being. And I don't understand that. I do not understand it, but it is my greatest accomplishment in this life. I understand why it's my greatest accomplishment. I do not understand why this culture fails to see the value of these opportunities, the priceless value, or the return on investment of such an endeavor. It's enormous, enormous. You know, we're talking thousands of % return on investment in my own life. It's just incredible. I learned this in the pit of this pain. I learned that I would die to protect someone in these states of deep psychological trauma, that it was worth dying to do something about that. Because there are things that are much worse than death. And these deep forms of psychological pain are 100 times more painful than death. I'm not afraid to die. I am terrified of these deep psychological states of horror and trauma, of grief and being alone there in such an overwhelming tapestry of feelings that the smallness of my individual self gets lost, gets absorbed, gets enmeshed, and can no longer be distinguished from that horrible morass of overwhelming shame and pain. I'm terrified of that. I'm not terrified of dying or just saying goodbye to the body. It's just no more rent, no more have to fuss around with money, no more. And it's just I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I was able to see the opportunity to serve and to give as a worthwhile thing to do. I'm so grateful for that. And I had help. I was meditating. My crystals have been so transcendent in this time. One of the things that I've enjoyed as a meme recently is the thought, why the hell should a human being know anything or know what to do? I mean, we're monkeys out of the trees, you know, a few 100,000 years ago. I mean, who said that monkeys who figured out how to imagine things should know anything about anything? You know, it's like people don't know anything. Um, most 99.9% of everything worth knowing, we don't even know we don't know. So I like that perspective. But crystals have been around for 200 million years. And they modulate energy. And so it has been crystals that got me through this, not a human being. Guidance. And I've been so blessed by some of the presences and people in my life. So grateful. There's another woman, I helped her, and she helped me much more than I helped her, I think. But I helped her become an adult. I watched her become an adult. And that's a phenomenal experience. It has nothing to do with age. I actually have become, I'd say, a 20% adult. I'm now 20% an adult for the first time in my life, perhaps, or at least knowing what that is. But I helped a woman become an adult, and played a seminal role in her life. And she's now in a lovely relationship, ready for her first child. I love her to bits. She taught me so much. 21 years old. Wow. I'm glad I can see that love. We had some painful things. Her mother stole some money from me. And I was really, really upset about that. And I'm glad I can see in this moment the love in a larger context and the distinctions between different logistics and love. So I'm learning to love for the first time, in part, in certain ways. I've known how strategically to love, but I haven't known because in certain ways. I've been in PTSD, in a dissociated state, unable to feel. And with such a well of grief on the other side of feeling that I needed help to go through that grief, which meant I needed a diagnosis, which didn't happen. So I just did endless, talk therapy without grieving, without diagnosis, and with little or no benefit to the PTSD. So I have not been able to love, which is one of the reasons I think it's worth dying, to help someone to do something about the traumatized state of so many of our abused human beings in this culture. And that leads to the birth of another project in this time, happinessdata.org. My new 501c3 nonprofit. Realizing that nothing would make me happier than living in Thailand and helping people in various ways and getting excited about how that could happen. I formed this nonprofit so that I could give money to it from my own business. And so I could give money to it from my own business and not have to pay taxes to help people, which has been aggravating me in the last few years. And so Happiness Data has a very broad mission under the paradigm of scientific well-being, which is how to create the most well-being per unit of energy invested. So if you have 1 minute and you want to invest it in a way that will create the most units of well-being, so we're dealing with maybe it's 1 unit of well-being, but it is sustainable, it lasts 10 years. Well, if it's 1 unit of well-being per day for 10 years, you know, we're looking at thousands of units of well-being. So that's a great, you know, that's a great use of a minute. What's the best use of $1? You know, what's the best use of a piece of wood? How do you turn energy into well-being in the most elegant design possible? And I'm thrilled with my experimentation. I have a little project called 100,000 Acts of Love, where I go around trying to be loving. And if I do, I record it. I record it on a little video project for a documentary, 100,000 Acts of Love. And I live in the question, how can I create the most well-being for the most people with how can I create the most well-being for the most people with the time and energy available to me? And how can I create 1,000 acts of love? So that's a fun project. And I created a website called Scientific Wellbeing because that was the beginning before the nonprofit kicked in. And I just wanted to populate that paradigm. Scientific well-being, a paradigm of measuring impact and creating as much positive impact as possible with the least effort, and educating people on what those things might be, hence Happiness Data. And so this is a lot of fun. And then, of course, large tapestries in the landscape of my mind that I will not go into, you know, of more than 1,000 lifetimes worth of ideas and directions to stretch and grow into, taking this momentum forward, growing into another project with my sweetheart, starting a business. She makes these phenomenal cards that she gives to me. And I never see her so happy as when she's making a card. And so here's just happens to be one of them she made for me. And so it's in this particular one little drawing, then she's got a little felt cutout she's glued on, and then let's see what's inside. I haven't looked in this in a while. Okay, so then you look inside, and there's this wonderful dynamism and, you know, and writing, and so she absolutely loves making these cards. When I met, she was a golf caddy, which was not suited to her strengths. And after watching her joy giving me these cards, I helped her start a business as an artist, where she now has few things on Zaz, yeah. She's been creating, probably about 1,000 pieces of art over the last 18 months. I don't know, somewhere, I guess maybe 300, 400. Well, anyway, somewhere between 300 and more than 1,000 pieces of art. And so I serve as her broker because selling is slow and she's not, she doesn't enjoy that part, but so that she has her own independence. I give her money every time she creates an art piece, and slowly she's learning how to sell them, and then as she sells them, she just gives back the money. It's not a profit thing for me. The profit is watching my sweetheart get to do something she absolutely loves and is fabulous at. And because I've never received such nice cards in my entire life, and I love receiving cards, I'm also excited about, she's sold, I don't know, 20 or 30 pieces of her art so far. But the feedback coming back is similar to like how exciting to have a custom handmade piece of art, and so I'm excited about. So I've helped her launch that business as a suggestion and as a banker to see that a new art business is in the world that is going to touch thousands of people's lives with the beauty of my sweetheart's little attention to detail, her imagination. It's so wonderful. So anyway, I'm very pleased with that. We're starting to work on apps that can create more well-being. I'm looking at that in my own landscape design business because when I'm traveling, most of my work has ground down to a halt. And I've had to be outside the country because the great country of America will not let my girlfriend even visit me because she's too poor. That's America for you. The fiance visa hasn't gone through yet. Great America takes 10 months to process a bit of paperwork so you can get married. So, well, enough, all this rubbish. But so I've been overseas, wanting to spend time with my girlfriend rather than my job. And so a lot of my work just grinds to a halt at a cost of around 30 grand a month. And so just burning through money. And one of the apps I'm developing, it would allow the owner of a landscape business to travel and have a tighter connection with clients and crew through the app than most owners do with their jobs day to day when they're there, and so from all kinds of, so it's a very, very sophisticated bit of design software, but that's one thing I'm working on to help that industry. And then and then working for Happiness Data, doing a lot of app kind of work around that and design work. So we're looking for good app designers and coders, who can help with a lot of this, because some of the work I want to do is around community, because the same kind of thing, I watched my sweetheart grow enormously with the protocols that I suggested, just using emails. It was an amazing phenomenon to watch her grow so much. She's been the most competent student of my entire life, which is, hence the 600% growth and counting. But again, software needs to be facilitated. So that's kind of a little bit of a holding right there. The need for great coding and software and vision, people that care. I want to work with people who care. Fuck all this obsession with money. This is about people's lives having substantive improvement for a long time. Got anything better to do? Give me a break. I want to find people that care. And one of my goals is to start with a small circle. One or two people that, we want to contribute. We're contributing 30% or more of our energy towards the well-being of others in the world, in community, in people that need help. And we want to be excellent in that goal. This is a dream of mine. And so there's two kinds of symbiotic relationships kind of in that. One is, just forming a support group of, just regularly checking in online and in person to contribute 30% of our gifts or more to the world, based on the question, what can I learn? What can I do that brings the most well-being per unit of energy invested to the larger human field? This is a very powerful meditation. And I am in service to you in that commitment. I am in service to you in that commitment. It's just the discipline and the choice to put 30% of our energy, time, money, whatever, some mix of it, it can be, 30% of our energy into lifting the probability field on a global level, with no hubris around it, having this big global impact. No. But it creates a new life. It has created a new life for me that is worth living. In the finding of what's worth dying for, there's also a finding of what's worth living for. And I'm interested in this. And you can be an ally, supporting that. But I am in service. I am in service to those that are putting 30% or more of their energy into this, helping others. And so that's kind of wraps up the possibility, stuff. There's, as I say, 1,000 lifetimes worth of, different landscapes off in the terrain. And one of the, as a dreamer, in the truest sense of that word, as someone with grounded imagination, with incredible goal-achieving skills and experience, achieved thousands of goals in a number of different domains, I can be of help in your mission to lift the field, to bring that into the larger human circle. I can be of help and I'm happy to do it. So thank you for watching, and maybe we'll have something to do with one another.